Right after our son Kevin was born, my husband Brian resigned. He was a travel writer in name only, hardly worked, relied on my income, and lived a life driving around the country at whim. One evening, Brian returned from a trip, bringing along a young woman holding a baby.
"This is my lover Chloe and our child. I'm giving this son to you. We're getting divorced."
He shoved the signed divorce papers at me, speaking roughly.
"I'll come to pick them up in a week. Make sure you've signed them by then."
A week later, when Brian and Chloe showed up again, Kevin and I told them, "You can't divorce Mom, you know? Because
the car, $80,000. You haven't paid that back yet."
Brian's cheeks twitched.
"Plus, Dad, since you've been living off Mom's earnings, it might be better to postpone the divorce until you can support yourself."
Chloe was shocked. Brian stuttered his excuses. I couldn't help but smirk. "All right, Brian, it's time you faced the consequences for your actions. I am Grace, a 50-year-old housewife. I live with my husband Brian, who is the same age, and our 15-year-old son, Kevin. Brian and I met through a mutual acquaintance and started dating. Always brimming with confidence and lively, Brian was full of stories and a great conversationalist. Being with him was always a good time. I thought it would be wonderful to walk through life with such a person, so when he proposed at a stylish restaurant, I was over the moon. However, less than a year later, I found myself regretting our marriage. We should have kids soon. Given our age, yes. Having such conversations, we were blessed with a honeymoon baby, which felt like reaching the heavens. Looking back, that period might have been the happiest for me. Suffering from severe morning sickness, unable to clean or prepare meals, Brian never blamed me but took care of me. "Grace, do you think you could eat some oatmeal? How about white fish or fruits? I hear they're good for the body." Brian, who was not good at cooking, bought oatmeal, frozen food, and fruits from the local supermarket and brought them to me as I lay in bed. To avoid making me feel sick, he would eat his meals in the dining room, come to pick up the finished dishes, and even do the dishes. On weekends, he would take care of the laundry and cleaning as well. "Brian, I'm sorry for the trouble, and thank you for everything," I said, expressing my gratitude, and Brian smiled and gently stroked my head.
Supporting each other is natural for a married couple. It's not just your body here, be careful not to overdo it.
Aside from being diligent and kind, Brian was a regular employee at a big company. I truly felt fortunate to have married him. But the end of happiness came suddenly. Early one morning, I went into labor, and Brian took a day off to take me to the hospital, waiting outside the delivery room for the baby's birth. Finally, the baby was born safely. The midwife went to Brian with the baby wrapped in a blanket and with a smile said,
"Congratulations! It's a healthy boy."
At that moment, Brian's face changed.
"Ha, it's not a girl? It's a boy."
Brian's expression went from one filled with anticipation to one of deep disappointment. After moving to the ward, Brian let out a deep sigh and muttered in a frustrated tone,
"Ah, a boy."
At the time, I didn't realize the seriousness of the matter and tried to comfort Brian with a smile. "Brian, you wanted a girl, didn't you? You probably were told by the doctor it was a boy. It's disappointing, I know. I've heard there are still families who desire a male heir from their in-laws. However, neither my mother-in-law Evelyn nor Brian seemed to strongly wish for a boy. Although we found out the gender because Brian wanted to know, honestly, I was fine with either."
"I always dreamed of becoming a father to a girl,"
Brian exclaimed, his eyes widening.
"Boys are smelly, dirty, and not cute at all. Why didn't you give birth to a girl?"
His harsh words made me angry.
It's not like I can choose. Even practicing gender selection doesn't guarantee 100% success. It's our precious baby. Shouldn't the gender be irrelevant?
It can't be irrelevant. Damn it. I seriously don't need a boy. With those words, Brian left the room. And from then, he never visited the hospital again, didn't even contact me, and I had to leave the hospital alone. With my parents' house being far away and unable to rely on them, I reluctantly called Evelyn to ask for a pickup. Brian was looking forward to having a girl. I understand why he would want to complain. I explained the situation, but as expected, Evelyn took Brian's side. You're not going back to your parents, are you? I can come over to help if you like. Thank you. I'll get in touch if there's anything I need. I politely declined with a forced smile. It's a 30-minute drive from the in-laws' house. Rather than relying on Evelyn, who never misses a chance to say something snide, it felt much more comfortable to raise our child just as a couple, busy as we might be. I thought Brian would quickly get over his mood and start adoring the baby. But I was too optimistic. A hellish life of raising a child alone began. Before giving birth, Brian and I used to browse baby furniture online and read articles and books about babies together, wondering what our life would be like. It was a time of pleasant anticipation. However, as soon as Brian found out it was a boy, he seemed to lose interest. After coming home from the hospital, he left everything to me, from naming the baby to all the minor care tasks.
Brian, could you hold Kevin for a bit? He's been crying nonstop, and I can't prepare meals or clean.
Even when I pleaded with Brian upon his return home, he coldly ignored Kevin and snapped.
You know I'm tired from work, right? Show some consideration. Dinner's not ready? Then I'll just eat out. Taking care of the baby is a mom's job, right? I'll overlook the mess in the house. Just make sure you do the laundry, okay? It'd be troubling if I had nothing to wear.
Even when Kevin cried, Brian would ignore him and play with his mobile phone. No matter how much I begged, he wouldn't change his diapers, or handle baths or feedings. Of course, dealing with night crying was out of the question. One evening, while watching TV, Brian showed annoyance when Kevin started crying.
It's so noisy. He's been crying nonstop.
He seems sleepy, but he won't sleep even when I hold and soothe him.
Why don't you take him for a walk? That should stop the crying. Go outside.
I couldn't believe my ears. It's February. And it's 8 p.m. You want me to go for a walk when it's snowing? Are you out of your mind? When I snapped back, Brian twisted his mouth into a smirk.
Driving around is a waste of gas. Maybe the cold will stop the crying quickly?
I was furious at such an unthinkable remark from a father. Holding Kevin, I grabbed the car keys, slammed the living room door shut, and left the house. After securing Kevin in the child seat and driving around the neighborhood for a while, I heard him start to snore from the back seat, which reassured me. Upon returning home, I ignored Brian, who was rolling with laughter at the TV, and put the baby to bed. As my distrust towards Brian grew day by day, one afternoon, Brian came home early. You're home early today. While feeding Kevin his baby food, I asked, and as he took off his jacket, Brian nonchalantly said,
I quit my job. Really? What?
I was shocked. I've been thinking for a while now, I'm not cut out for being an employee. Starting a company or working freelance, using my talents, that's what suits me. From now on, I'll live freely, not tied down by a company. Brian spoke proudly, leaving me dumbfounded. I tentatively asked,
So, do you have another job lined up?
I like driving, right? And I won a writing contest when I was a kid. I think I have talent. So, I'll wander around the country and write travel logs. Brian's eyes sparkled as he spoke, and I felt like I was going to faint. 12 years in sales, and now he wants to be a writer? Brian doesn't even write a blog, and the computer in his study is just for show. It must have been some article on the net that inspired Brian's whimsical idea. Don't look so worried. In 2 years, I'll be making over $100,000. It seems like anyone can do it, so someone as talented as me is sure to be successful. I alternated my gaze between Kevin, who was grabbing food with his hands, and Brian, who was going on about himself. I was planning to return to work once Kevin turned 1, but now I found myself having to support an unemployed husband. That afternoon,
First, I need to get the right setup.
Brian cheerfully went to an electronics store to buy the latest model computer. After putting Kevin to bed and doing the dishes, I received a call from Evelyn. Reluctantly, I answered the phone. Hello?
You! What have you been telling him?
Evelyn yelled at me right from the start.
I don't understand what you mean. Leaving that company meant a secure life. Going from an $80,000 salary to suddenly being unemployed is unbelievable.
That's exactly what I wanted to say.
It's because you're always fussing over the baby that Brian got stressed and quit his job. Isn't it a wife's job to support her husband? You failure!
If you have complaints, please talk to him directly. I'm busy, so I'm hanging up now. Evelyn was still shouting, but I hung up and ignored her calls and messages for a while after that. I was furious with Brian's selfishness, but I resolved to work diligently for Kevin's sake. I hoped that seeing me manage both household chores and childcare diligently would make Brian reflect a bit, but it was a waste. Brian would lock himself in the study, fiddling with the computer, or suddenly announce, "I'm going on a trip," and leave without contact, returning days later. Thus, I couldn't rely on Brian and had to use the workplace daycare for sick children, working hard. It felt almost like I was a single mother rather than just doing childcare alone. Working full-time while raising a young child was hard, but sharing childcare woes with colleagues who also had young children and encouraging each other lifted my spirits. Thanks to my salary, and despite Brian taking writing courses, he eventually started earning $300 a month. Yet, our household finances still depended solely on my income. That was because Brian used his earnings as pocket money. I ended up giving him gas money. Then one day, Brian returned from New Orleans driving a bright red sports car.
What? Where did this car come from?
I fell in love with it and bought it. $50,000 for this beauty is a steal, right? I was floored.
$50,000?
I got bored of the old car after 2 years. This one's my new partner.
A writer has to drive a cool car, right?
Brian said with a smug smile, making me press my temples and ask,
Wait a minute. How did you pay for it? You have zero savings, right?
Don't worry, it's an 84-month loan. You can afford $600 a month, right? I'll be a best-selling writer soon, so just cover it until then. I was stunned, then gradually filled with anger.
There's no way I can afford $600. We're already at our limit. Whose fault do you think we're struggling with money?
Brian twisted his face and retorted,
All you talk about is money, money. How shallow. When did you become like this? Support your husband's dreams more. You're too practical, it's boring.
Saying that, he stormed off into his room.
Dad's back?
Kevin, waking from his nap, stretched and asked me.
Yes. He seems busy with work and has gone to his room. Say hello when he comes down.
Okay. Hey, Mom? How long will Dad be staying at home?
I don't know. I'll ask him later.
Kevin's sad smile pained my heart. Even after Kevin started attending childcare, Brian didn't try to interact with him, maintaining a cold attitude. Brian would respond if Kevin spoke, but he wouldn't initiate conversation or make eye contact. I wondered if it would be better to divorce if this relationship continued. But wouldn't Kevin get hurt if he knew his parents divorced? That thought held me back. Suddenly, 15 years had passed since Brian quit his job. His monthly income was still just a few $100s. The reason for his stagnant salary was clear. Brian, now proficient with computers, had discovered the joy of online gaming, prioritizing it over work, and spending any significant income on game credits, with the rest going to clothes or clubbing. On the rare occasions he brought home a souvenir, he'd boast about it for a while.
Those cookies I bought the other day were delicious, right? It's because of my job that we can enjoy such good stuff. You should be more grateful.
Just as I had finished paying off the loan for that sports car and started to feel a bit relieved, Brian sold it and switched to another new car. Of course, I initially protested.
I want you to contribute to the living expenses. Shouldn't you spend more time at home as a father? Try to limit your spending on hobbies.
And so on. Then, Brian would become furious, veins bulging on his forehead.
You're mocking me for my low salary, aren't you? Looking down on me, laughing at me. That's not it. I just wish you'd act a bit more like a father.
I spoke with patience, but Brian retorted angrily, still with a look of rage.
Next year, I'll definitely make $100,000. Then we'll have some breathing room, and I can spend time at home and contribute financially. Just wait without complaining until then.
After repeating this exchange several times, it gradually became a nuisance, and recently, I've given up on discussing it. Kevin, perhaps as a reaction to his dad's bad example, grew up to be honest and a good kid. Always considerate when I came home tired from work. He helped around the house regularly, and when I woke up from napping on the sofa, I'd find a blanket over me, and for my birthday, he'd prepare a homemade dinner and a bouquet of flowers, pampering me thoroughly. One evening, while I was preparing dinner, I heard the front door unlock. Thinking Kevin had returned from his tutoring class. I then heard Brian's voice talking to someone. A guest, perhaps? Removing my apron, I went to the entrance and froze. Brian was there, cozying up to a young woman holding a baby.
Welcome back.
Dressed revealingly, with heavy makeup. She must be a girl from the club he frequents. But why bring her to our house? The woman, along with Brian, entered our home, pinched her nose, and came to check the pot in the kitchen. With a pitiful smile and a nasal voice, she sneered.
Ugh, it smells like garlic. Brian, it's going to stick to my clothes.
Sorry, Chloe. Hey Grace, do something about it.
It's fine, I'll endure it. Is dinner meatloaf? Such a mundane dish. Brian, the Italian full course was delicious.
The woman boasted, and Brian's eyes crinkled in amusement.
That place is really good. My wife here is just as you see, frugal. Suits her, right? Nothing special about her meals.
Brian, you're terrible.
Their laughter only added to my irritation. Thanks to his low salary, I've been deprived of Italian cuisine for 15 years. Swallowing the words that rose to my throat, I asked Brian.
Who might this be?
The woman, with a challenging look, chirped.
Nice to meet you, I'm Chloe, Brian's wife.
Hey, don't get ahead of yourself. Brian glanced at Chloe and the baby, smiling happily. This is my lover Chloe and our child. She gave birth to a girl for me. Cute, isn't she? Her nose, just like Brian's. The baby, dressed in pink, cradled in Chloe's arms, gazed at me with round eyes. Oh, I see. And what do you want? I asked coldly, and Brian smirked nastily.
I'm giving this son to you. We're getting divorced.
He placed the signed divorce papers on the dining table, declaring with heavy breath.
I'll come to pick them up in a week. Make sure you've signed them by then.
Brian has had enough of grace. I'll be taking the wife's position. Chloe, though just a lover, was unbearably arrogant. Brian, where are you going? Isn't this your home?
I don't want to be with you anymore. Once you and Kevin leave, I'll come back.
His reasoning left me dumbfounded. They left with loud laughter. The distinctive roar of the modified sports car fading into the distance. Stunned for a moment, I snapped back to reality and looked down at the divorce papers. Anger started to boil inside me as I looked at the papers. He abandoned his role as a father simply because the born child was a boy. Quitting his job on a whim, spending his meager income on himself, and now demanding a divorce because he has a lover and a child? I tore up the divorce papers into small pieces, crumpled them, and threw them in the trash can. My anger was about to explode. The audacity! How selfish can he get? I clenched my fists. If that's how he wants it, I have plans of my own. You'll face the consequences for everything you've done. A week later, Brian returned with Chloe. This time without the baby. Presumably having left the child with someone to avoid a showdown. When Kevin came to the door, Brian showed a moment of awkwardness. Kevin, nice to meet you. I'm going to be your new mom. Please take care of me. Ignoring Chloe's overly enthusiastic greeting, Kevin turned his gaze to Brian. Dad, you're back, so you should say I'm home, right? Brian brushed off Kevin's comment with a sullen expression and led Chloe by the hand to the dining table, sitting her next to himself. As I was making coffee, Brian harshly spoke up.
I don't need coffee. Just hand over the divorce papers.
Well, it's going to be a long night, so you'll probably want something to drink. I smiled and placed 4 cups of coffee on the table. Sitting down opposite Brian with Kevin and Chloe opposite each other. I had debated how much to tell Kevin but decided he was old enough at 15 to understand everything. After moistening my throat with coffee, I told Brian plainly. I threw away the divorce papers.
What? You don't want to divorce me that badly, huh?
Brian smirked mockingly, causing Kevin to look at him with disdain. You can't divorce Mom, you know? Because the total for the 2 new cars, $80,000. You haven't paid that back yet. Brian lost color in his face. Don't say you've forgotten. When will you pay it back? I covered all of it, after all. Yeah, Dad. And if you remarry her, how are you going to support yourself? Kevin chuckled. Since you've been living off Mom's earnings, maybe you should postpone the divorce until you can support yourself? Brian was visibly shaken. Chloe looked at Brian's profile in surprise.
What? What's this about? Brian, what's going on?
It's just a family matter, Chloe. You don't need to know. I confronted a flustered Brian with printed payment statements. Here, this is for the previous car, 84 payments. And this is for the new car. Chloe, do you understand? All paid from my card. After checking the statements, Chloe looked puzzled. Why aren't you paying for it yourself, Brian? You make $100,000 a year, right? And you're a department head at a well-known company. Kevin and I burst out laughing together. Wait, you're still carrying around a business card from 15 years ago? That's fraud. Your current title is unemployed, right? We couldn't help but laugh uproariously.
No! I'm a freelance writer.
Self-proclaimed, focusing on travel. Less income than a high school part-timer. Used to make $80,000, now about $4,000? Chloe was shocked.
What?
$4,000? Yes. Look.
Hey, stupid.
I showed Chloe the account history. The account history with monthly deposits of $400 or $500 from the same company name, leaving her speechless.
So, the designer clothes you're wearing, those fancy shoes, the luxury sports car, all bought by Grace? All the treats have been on Grace's dime?
Yes. See here. I leaned over the table, showing Chloe the credit card bills. He took my card, which I hardly use, and spent without my permission.
I'll pay it back later. It's fine, right? We're family.
Brian raised his voice.
In 2 or 3 years, I'll be making over $100,000. Chloe, you believe in me, unlike them, right?
Chloe offered a non-committal smile. Brian said the same thing when Kevin was a baby. 15 years later, nothing has changed. Next to me, Kevin nodded. You can live with Chloe, remarry, whatever. Just settle the debt for the new car and the unauthorized card use. Of course, you'll also have to pay compensation and my child support.
Shut up, I know.
Brian yelled back, then turned to Chloe.
So, Chloe, you'll lend me the money to pay Grace back, right?
Can I have some time to think about it, Brian? Chloe's face contorted. I thought that was a reasonable reaction.
What? I'll pay you back later. We're going to be married, so it's fine.
Brian was trying to force his flawed logic on the hesitant Chloe. Suppressing a laugh of disbelief, I picked up my cell phone. Time for the second phase of my revenge. By the way, did Chloe also join Brian on that hotel assignment he covered? When I asked cheerfully, Chloe awkwardly looked away, but Brian, having embraced his audacity, flashed an annoyingly smug smile. Oh yeah. The scenery was beautiful, it was a nice place. That's good to hear. That was a good guess. I smiled at Chloe. Look, my cousin owns the hotel, right? Since you two came together, he sent me evidence photos to let me know about the affair. I opened the mobile phone app, touched the photo file to display it, and placed the mobile phone in the center of the dining table for everyone to see easily. Oh? Who's that with Chloe? Huh? Chloe froze as she peered at the image. Beside her, Brian, adopting the same posture, quickly turned into a visage filled with anger. Chloe, who is this?
Hey! Taking photos like that is an invasion of privacy.
I smiled at Chloe's outrage. Sorry about that. I couldn't forgive my cousin's husband's infidelity, so I ended up gathering various things. Meddling in affairs. Brian, it was just an acquaintance I happened to meet. Don't worry about it. Chloe twisted her body and leaned on Brian, who shrugged her off.
Chloe said she wanted to go, so I made the reservation.
Then, Brian's face stiffened.
Come to think of it, you weren't there when I woke up in the middle of the night, right? Don't tell me you went to his room?
No, it's not like that. Just an acquaintance, really. I almost laughed at Chloe's repeated excuses.
I took a large envelope prepared at the edge of the dining table, pulled out several photos, and laid them out on the table. Chloe seemed shocked as well, covering her mouth and screaming. These were photos sent to me last year. Chloe, heavily pregnant, snuggling up to a man and coming out of an obstetrics clinic.
Hey!
Just asked him to accompany me. Believe me, Brian. Brian's voice grew menacing as Chloe clasped her hands together, desperately making excuses. I read out from the investigation report I pulled from the envelope. So, it was supposed to be a doctor's visit for both spouses that day. If someone was to accompany you, it should have been the baby's dad, undoubtedly. Wait. Isn't the baby from that time? Wasn't it Brian's? Chloe fell silent, and I let out a thin smile. This man, even though he's the dad of the child, cheated with another woman and ran away after the birth. How terrible. Poor Chloe. As I sneered, Brian, in a panic, defended Chloe.
Chloe wouldn't do such a thing. Right, the dad of that kid is some other man, that can't be.
Sorry. Chloe apologized in a weak voice, and Brian, momentarily frozen, blushed with anger and shame.
Because he ran away, you lied about it being my child to force a marriage? Unbelievable!
As Brian shouted, Chloe yelled back just as fiercely.
What? You were drowning in debt and being supported by your wife, lying big time to me. I have no business being criticized.
Then Chloe turned her anger towards me.
You're also awful. Knowing he's been cheating and yet letting him do what he whatever?
That's right. I've been taking care of a husband who does whatever he pleases for 15 years. I thought I'd hit him with undeniable evidence and demand compensation. I leaked a sardonic smile.
Sending lovey-dovey messages to my mobile phone by mistake, suddenly dressing up, coming home reeking of women's perfume, it was all too clear.
Saying that, Kevin also crossed his arms and nodded. When he was at home, he was always in a good mood. Seriously, how can you cheat when mom has been taking care of you like this? What kind of nerve do you have? Kevin looked utterly disgusted.
I hired a detective to find out the identity of the other woman, and got some bonus photos, so I thought I had to tell Brian too.
I told Chloe and Brian, dripping with sarcasm.
That's right. You were saying things like I'm not suited to be bossed around by superiors, weren't you? That's rich. Fired for being responsible for a scandal.
Brian's eyes widened.
How did you know that? I heard it from an acquaintance who introduced you to us.
I said with a sneer.
You invited new employees for drinks, and when sharing a taxi home, you touched them. They complained to their superiors, and you got fired. Deservedly so.
Brian shook.
They were just touched over the clothes, making a big deal out of it. It was just the heat of the moment. It's not like it diminishes anything. Dad, you're the lowest,
Kevin said with a cold voice. It was unbearable when I heard that. I thought, what a shameful person. It was probably more shocking than not being cared for.
Really? What does he think women are? Brian, so you were that kind of person? Gross.
Chloe looked at Brian with a look of disgust, as if she was looking at something filthy.
Huh? I don't want to be lectured by someone who tries to pin a child made with another man on me.
Brian glared at Chloe with a sharp look.
What you're doing is no better.
Both are to blame. The new employees who were victimized are planning to sue Brian, so brace yourself. Brian looked surprised.
Huh? For that? They're not satisfied with just the dismissal. They want compensation for the emotional distress.
Brian was shocked.
I don't have that kind of money.
Brian yelled, his face turning red, while Kevin looked on with disdain.
Dad, you should take responsibility for your actions.
Brian, no matter how much money you have, it won't be enough. I smiled at Brian with pity and turned my gaze to Chloe. So, Chloe, if you're okay with this, I'd gladly give it to you.
I don't want such an old man.
Chloe stood up energetically.
I thought I'd make him a dad because he said he was a department head at a big company with a salary of $100,000.
She glared at Brian hatefully and spoke rapidly.
But in reality, he was just a prideful liar living off his wife, with bad habits and drowning in debt. Being with him was a mistake. Give me back my time.
That's my line. Brian also stood up and shouted. A woman who cheats with another man is the last thing I need. Don't ever show your face to me again.
Then let's break up. Bye.
With a huff, Chloe left the house, and Brian, watching her go from the doorway, collapsed to his knees, sobbing and cursing.
Terrible, Chloe. You said you loved me, but to have a young man's child. No matter the woman, I don't need a child from another man.
I rebuked Brian, who was sulking. You abandoned your role as Kevin's dad and now you suffer because you wanted a child with your mistress. Children are not accessories. Consider Kevin's feelings for once.
It's okay, Mom. I don't think of him as my dad anymore.
Kevin smiled sadly. I've seen him as just a roommate for a long time now. I sighed, looking at my pathetic husband sniffling on the floor. I'm completely out of patience. Brian, from now on, we'll discuss through a lawyer. I told Brian in a solemn tone. The fees for the 2 cars I covered, the unauthorized card charges, and compensation. I'll file for divorce after all that is transferred to my account.
How am I supposed to pay all that at once? Oh, if you haven't filed for divorce yet, we can just cancel it.
Brian's face lit up with what he thought was a brilliant idea.
That way, we won't need compensation or child support. Look, Grace, I was wrong. Let's start over.
I reflexively pushed away Brian's reaching hand. Don't joke with me. Afterwards, Kevin and I kicked out Brian, who wouldn't give up. After the divorce, Brian, kicked out of the house by me, went crying to Evelyn, but Evelyn, concerned about public image, was furious about her son's affairs and disowned him. Thus, Brian moved to a cheap apartment and started working seriously for the first time in 15 years. Being 50 years old became a barrier to securing a permanent sales position, so he finally found work in physical labor. He is being yelled at by younger supervisors and works desperately every day. Later, sued by the new employees, Brian paid the settlement money, which he managed by selling his current luxury sports car. However, this was far from enough to cover the unauthorized use of my card, compensation, and the cost of the first car I paid for, leading to more debt to settle them. Surely, despite working, he remains burdened with repayments to me, with only a small amount of money left for himself. Of course, I also demanded compensation from Chloe. Her parents covered it, transferring the money to my account. The baby's father was apparently a customer at the store. Chloe, who got pregnant with a customer's child, was fired for breaking the rules and moved back in with her parents. However, after giving birth, she was also disowned by them. Now, she leaves her baby at a daycare, works at a different club during the weekdays, and does part-time work at a restaurant on weekends, enduring harsh days. Kevin's child support is deposited into my account every month. We've contracted through a lawyer that immediate action will be taken if there's ever a delay. Kevin, now 16, aims to become a pharmacist and is diligently studying in an advanced class.
I'll make things easier for you once I graduate from college. Just wait.
Kevin said with a smile, earning his own pocket money through part-time work amidst his busy study schedule. Compared to worrying about Brian's debts, working for college funds feels almost enjoyable. From now on, I look forward to living fulfilling days together with my kind and reliable son.